I lost my job, so my family threw me out. They had no idea I was secretly rich. The dinner table had always been a place of tension in the Osei household. But the evening Daniel came home with news of his layoff turned it into something far more painful. He sat down quietly, folded his hands, and told his mother Gloria and his brother Marcus that his company had cut an entire department and he was among those let go. He expected sympathy. Instead, he got silence, the cold, calculating disappointment, undressed up as practicality. Gloria set her fork down and reminded him that the bills didn't stop coming just because his paycheck did. Marcus, everyone to miss an opportunity to feel superior, called him irresponsible and said this was exactly what he had always expected from Daniel. Not a word of comfort. Not a single question about how he was feeling. By nightfall, the desist made without him. Gloria appeared in the hallway as Daniel was sitting on the edge of his bed, and in the flattest voice she could manage, she told him that until he got back on his feet and showed the family he was serious, he needed to make other arrangements. Marcus stood behind her like a shadow, adding that they were not a charity. Daniel looked at both of them for a long moment. He did not shout. He simply packed a small bag. He walked to the front door and said quietly that he hoped one day they would understand why he had stayed silent about certain things. Then he stepped out into the night and pulled the door shut behind him with barely a sound. What neither Gloria nor Marcus knew was that Daniel had walked 2 blocks to where a sleek black car was waiting. A driver stepped out, greeted him by name, and asked if he should take him to the penthouse. Daniel said yes. And within minutes he was standing in a sprawling luxury apartment high above the city, floor 2's. Isling windows showing the entire skyline glittering below. His personal assistant Jade was already there with a tablet, briefing him on his portfolio, up more than 4% that quarter, his real estate holdings across 3 cities. All fully occupied, and the successful close of his tech investment fund's latest round that very morning. Daniel thanked her, set down his jacket, and stood alone at the window. His face was not triumphant. It was thoughtful, even a little sad. The wealth had not come overnight. 5 years earlier, Daniel had been hunched over a laptop at 2 in the morning in a tiny apartment when a notification appeared telling him his startup had received its first seed funding of $500,000. He had wanted to tell his family that same night. He had actually picked up the phone. But he remembered how Marcus had laughed at him just weeks before when he described his business idea, calling it a fantasy and telling him to get a real job. So Daniel put the phone down. He kept working. He signed his first property deal alone. He shook hands with investors in boardrooms and celebrated by himself. The corporate job he had just lost was something he had taken deliberately, not for the income, but to stay grounded, to remain connected to the person he had been before any of this began. The next morning, Marcus was scrolling through his phone when he stopped cold. A business magazine had run a feature story, complete with a photograph of Daniel at a gala, under the headline describing him as a quiet billionaire most people had never heard of. Marcus called his mother over with a voice that had lost all its confidence. They stood together reading about the companies Daniel owned, the properties across 4 countries, the investments that had made him one of the most quietly successful young entrepreneurs of his generation. Gloria lowered herself into a chair, her hands trembling. She said it out loud, slowly, the way people say things they cannot quite believe, that they had thrown their own son out of his house, a house, it turned out, that Daniel had been paying for all along without ever mentioning it. Daniel answered when his mother called. He listened as her voice broke apart mid-sentence, and she tried to explain herself. He stopped her gently and told her she did not need to explain. But he also told her the truth, that the money had never been the point, that what had hurt him was not losing his job, but losing the sense that he mattered to his family when he appeared to have nothing. That was the real wound. Gloria asked if she could see him, and he told her he would come by the weekend, but that things needed to change across the board, all of them. She agreed without hesitation. When Daniel arrived at the family home that Saturday, it was Marcus who was waiting on the porch. The posture that had always carried a certain arrogance was gone. He looked like someone who had spent several days sitting with something uncomfortable and had finally decided to face it. He told Daniel he owed him an apology, not because of the article, but because he had treated his own brother like a burden for years. Daniel asked him why. And Marcus gave him an honest answer for perhaps the first time. He had always been afraid that Daniel would outgrow them. And when it became clear that Marcus had not known how to handle it. Daniel looked at him for a long moment, then reached out his hand. The handshake became an embrace. Daniel told him he had never wanted to leave the family behind. He wanted to bring them forward with him, but only if they were willing to do the work of changing. Later that evening, the three of them sat together at the table with cups of tea. The atmosphere between them quieter and warmer than it had been in years. Gloria asked him one last question, why he had never told them. Daniel smiled and gave her the only answer that was completely true. He said he needed to know that this family loved Daniel the person, not Daniel the success story. He needed to know what they were made of when they thought he had nothing. Now he knew. And even though the answer had hurt, he also knew it had led them to something more honest than they had ever had before. Gloria reached across the table and held his hand without saying a word. Outside, the city moved on as it always did. But inside that small house, something that had been broken for a long time had finally begun to heal.